China's central government has condemned ongoing protests in Hong Kong following another weekend of unrest. In a rare press conference on Monday, officials from Beijing weighed in on the demonstrations that have taken place in the territory for 2 months. The protests were initially sparked by a proposed extradition bill. It would have allowed suspected criminals to be deported to mainland China for trial. That bill was suspended, but violent clashes between protesters and police have continued as calls for democratic reforms grow louder. More than 60 people were arrested in demonstrations over the weekend. For more on this, Matthew Kroenig joins me now from Washington. He is a professor at Georgetown University and deputy director of the Scowcroft Center at the Atlantic Council. He's also the author of The Logic of American Nuclear Strategy. Thank you so much for being with us, Matthew. What message were Beijing officials trying to get across at Monday's press conference?
Well, they were very clear that they see these protests in Hong Kong as posing a threat to China and to the Chinese Communist Party. They said the continuation of this instability could be a threat to China itself. And I think it goes to show what an urgent crisis this is for the Chinese Communist Party, that they held the press conference. This was indeed the first time the top official responsible for Hong Kong has spoken out in the 8 weeks of these protests. Pretty remarkable to see that.
A spokesperson at the press conference said the one country, two systems agreement between Beijing and Hong Kong rests on what they called 3 red lines that must never be crossed. Can you explain to us how Hong Kong operates under that arrangement?
Yes, well, Hong Kong was a British colony for many years. And in 1997, when Hong Kong was returned to China, there was an agreement among the parties that while there would be one country, Hong Kong would be part of one China, that there would be 2 different systems. Mainland China would be ruled by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, but Hong Kong would continue to enjoy the freedoms that it enjoyed under British rule. What was said at the press conference was essentially that there are limits to these 2 systems, that if Hong Kong crosses certain lines, essentially that if the protests become a threat to the sovereignty of China, that China could intervene to stop the protests.
Yet, is Beijing considering military intervention in Hong Kong?
You know, a couple of weeks ago, I think most experts would have said no, but this is an issue that's come up twice now in the past couple of days. And Chinese officials have said that they do have the right under Hong Kong's constitution that if the Hong Kong government calls them in to help restore civil order, that they do have the right to intervene. So it's becoming more ominous with the threat of Chinese military intervention on the table. We remember, of course, how the Chinese responded to the Tiananmen Square protests 30 years ago with crushing the movement and killing many people and putting others in jail.
And how do the people of Hong Kong, particularly young people, view themselves? Do they feel they are independent from China?
Yes, they really have a Hong Kong-centric identity, they call it. So they do identify with Chinese culture, but they don't see themselves as part of mainland China. They have freedom of the press in Hong Kong, so they've read about the various abuses of human rights and other things in mainland China. And they've had a taste of freedom, and they want to continue to maintain that freedom. And I would say that this is, you know, for U.S. national security interest, an important point. We sometimes get down on our democratic system, but democracy still does have a lot of soft power around the world. People of Hong Kong don't want to live under the Chinese Communist Party.
Right. I mean, what is the view then for people in Hong Kong of China's central government?
Well, they don't want to live under the Chinese Communist Party, and over the years they've seen the CCP renege a little bit on this one country, two systems policy, with intervening in Hong Kong. Some disappearances of people in Hong Kong. And so the people of Hong Kong, this is why they're protesting. They don't want to live under an authoritarian system. They want to maintain their traditional freedoms.
And the protesters in Hong Kong, of course, do not seem to be backing down. Beijing is standing firmly against them. Is there any end in sight?
It's really hard to see. There are only a few ways this can end. One side or the other could back down. As you point out, that seems unlikely at this point. It's possible China could try to intervene and crush the protests, which is possible but would be a major humanitarian disaster. One possibility that some have called for is to find some kind of third-party mediator to come in and try to settle the dispute. That seems unlikely now, but I think that would be the best possible outcome to what's become an increasingly dangerous situation.
Interesting, and it's hard to imagine China would agree to that, though, given what we saw today with the officials in Beijing speaking out. All right, Matthew Kroenig in Washington for us. Matthew, thank you.
Thank you.